A pleasant day, Miss Cobilla, ladies and gentlemen. The topic to be debated today is about death penalty should be tolerated. Both the positive and negative side will be dealt with fair and equal view according to the arguments presented. On the negative side, let us welcome Miss Jovie Vales of BSBA 201. On the positive side, let us welcome Miss Angelica Abogaji of BSBA 201. Since we have already introduced the debaters and the topic to be debated, let us begin the proper debate. First to present is from the negative side. Next will be from the positive side.
Martin Luther King Jr., a social activist and Baptist minister who played a key role in the American Civil Rights Movement, said, "Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars." Good morning, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Death penalty or capital punishment. It has been a huge topic that steered both pros and cons of its toleration. The idea of death penalty, particularly the countries who have no grasp of this matter, debated intensely. However, the Philippines specifically have already grasped the notion of it, since not long ago, death penalty was abolished. It was in the year 2006. Today, I am going to convince you that death penalty should not be tolerated in our country again. I'm going to give you the image and context of how this policy violated the right to life, the innocent being convicted to death, the question of it being morally right, and of course, the justice that we know it possesses. For many who have not yet fully understood and scrutinized the notion of death penalty, its impacts are positive for the greater good of the people and the country. This impression, though fathomable, is misguided. The positive effect of the toleration of death penalty outweighed by its negative consequences. Again, the right to life. Those innocent people who were convicted to death were just being accused with crimes whom they did not commit. That it debtor's crime? Well, in fact, it's the exact opposing point according to research, and how justice is being defined and presented by death penalty. But before those points, I am going to define the topic first. As an opposition stand, there are three keywords in today's topic. They are death penalty, shouldn't, and tolerated. Death penalty, according to an article published by Roger Hood, a professor in Oxford, England, also called a capital punishment, is an execution of an offender sentenced to death after conviction by a court of law of a criminal offense. He also added that capital punishment should be distinguished from extrajudicial executions carried out without due process of law. The European Union regards this phenomenon as too inhuman that on the basis of a binding ruling by the European Court of Human Rights 1989, European Union countries may extradite an offender. Shouldn't, according to Cambridge English Dictionary, short from should not, that you should not do things like that. And tolerated, that according to Oxford Languages, to allow the existing occurrence or practice without interference. Death penalty is a policy that should not be tolerated. Indeed it is. Why? There are three main reasons for it. First, it doesn't deter crimes, as what most of us believe it does. According to Stephen Greenwald, through his experience, he has interviewed and represented numbers of people on death row, and that deterrence would not be a factor for many of these crimes that these people committed. For example, the American South has the highest murder rate in the country and oversees 81% of the nation's executions. In states without the death penalty, the murder rate is much lower. In 2012, the National Research Council, one of the most prestigious scientific institutions in the nation and the world, concluded that the studies claiming it as a deterrent were fundamentally flawed. Moreover, a 2009 study of criminologists did not believe in death penalties deterrence that arise, while only 5% did. According to American Civil Liberties Union, the death penalty has no deterrent effect. Claim that each execution deters a certain number of murders have been thoroughly discredited according to social science research. People commit murder largely and in the heat of passion, under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or because they're mentally ill, giving a little or no thought to the possible consequences of their acts.
What you take is what you owe, and what you owe is what you pay. And to cut the root is to stop the chain of crime. That is to execute the killers to reduce undesirable circumstances that will risk the lives of the victims. Have a pleasant day to all of us. Death penalty becomes inevitably the hottest issue that humanity presently talks about. Some countries have previously planned to have this subside. In that matter, relevant reaction to most people had significantly rising, conflicting beliefs, judgments, and arguments. Proponents who are in favor of death penalty and those who are against it throws individual views, opinions, and stands pertaining to this. Additionally, up to these days, it is still a confidential subject and it became one of the most debatable topics in every corner. Some supports and some were against it. But in individual perspective, should this be implemented or not? Should death penalty be tolerated or should this be abolished? However, crimes in all areas can occur in whatever circumstances, regardless of time, place, and situation, and in whatever purpose. No matter a person may at a very young age or older, everyone can be a target. Murder, rape, kidnapping, assault, robbery, violence, homicide, extortion, and some type of unjustified, unacceptable crimes. This can happen unfortunately to whatever type of victim. Now, how can we stop this? Get those offenders to get arrested and put in jail and let them release and do the same thing again and again? Having those potential killers and criminals to get encouraged because of unchanged laws, believing that after they get punished by being stuck in jail and eventually get freed, all these nexuses won't end, not unless death penalty shall be implemented, for which now I am presenting myself, offering you my presence, converting your beliefs to move that death penalty should really be tolerated. Here are some vital factors that would fill every pieces. I am unveiling some ideas that helps make things clear that would definitely connect you to the stand of tolerating. These factors will lead you to get the knowledge as to why death penalty should really be implemented. This includes death penalty deters crime, reduces potential number of victims of one offender, and carried out justice. Opposing views may against the idea of death penalty deters crimes. However, was proven by some thorough analysis. This will be discussed after defining some key terms being used that are relevant to the set indispensable factors that supports the toleration, such as death penalty, deter, and reduce. Therefore, before everything else, to have a clearer knowledge about death penalty, it is the act of executing a lawbreaker, an offender in the state being judged to be in a final decision, capital punishment, which emphasizes death. According to Kirk Bailey, in his article of What is Death Penalty, the death penalty, also known as capital punishment or execution, is the sentence of death imposed by courts as punishment for a crime. People who receive the death penalty typically are convicted of murder and similar capital crimes like aggravated murder or felony murder. State legislators established the death penalty and set forth the offenses that may be punished by death. Deter, from Oxford Languages. It is to discourage someone from doing something by instilling doubt or fear of the consequences to prevent the occurrence of something. Reduce, from Oxford Languages, is to make smaller or less amount, degree, or size. Now, why should death penalty really be tolerated? As the aforementioned factors such as death penalty deters crimes, reduces potential numbers of victims of the offender, and carried out justice. Opposing views and proponents of anti-death penalty states that capital punishments does not deter any crimes. But that is only because the death penalty is rarely used and takes years before an execution is actually carried out. Punishments which are swift and sure are actually the best deterrent. The fact that some states or countries do not use the death penalty have lower murder rates than jurisdictions which do is not evidence of the failure of deterrence. In fact, states with high murder rates would have even higher rates if they did not use the death penalty. If death penalty can deter crimes, then what more if there's no presence of the death penalty? What stopping criminals is in doing crimes is the fear of death, and that's the nature of human. The fear to be punished is what discourages potential or other criminals to do wrong things. An American economist who has done research about crimes and laws, Isaac Ehrlich, proves that death penalty can deter crimes, as he employed a new kind of analysis, which produced results showing that of every inmate who was executed, 7 lives were spared. This states that because if one criminal got erased, the possibilities of other victims to be the next target will vanish and will surely be reduced. And that is being solidified by this fact also. Specifically in Philippines, that most crimes nowadays are committed by those already convicted, those who are inside the new beloved prison or NBP, means that the nexuses of crimes can be continuously happen without exterminating the root, killers to be lawfully killed. More than that, according to the data provided by the World Prison Brief on 2017, the Philippines had 178,661 prisoners during the past years. There were 74.4% of the total population of prisoners who just returned to prison. Only proves that majority of the offenders are just ex-convicts who are difficult to be changed by the law through putting them in prison. Their behavior can't be changed. In result, crimes can't be stopped. Arrest, put them in jail, release, and do the crimes all over again. This will only take the lives of important people in the society. Meanwhile, we are giving killers enough chances to live, even though they already forfeited their rights by taking the lives of others. It is indeed unjust and unfair.
These are the fallacies that my stand, the negative stand, examined with the arguments presented by the positive side. Claiming that punishment are the best deterrent do not have any evidences and proofs that supports the claim. Another fallacy is claiming that the fear to be punished is what discourages crime. Again, do not possess any actual data evidences to back up the said claim. Okay, let me continue what I have paused earlier. Once more, there are three main reasons for the death penalty that should not be tolerated. The first one is that it doesn't deter crime. Second, the fact that it mistakenly put an innocent person to death. Robert Brecker, a criminal law professor who also teaches constitutional history at New York Law School, whose stand is pro to death penalty. Imagine, he is on the affirmative side that death penalty should be tolerated, claim that they might mistakenly execute the innocent. They really do not know for a fact that they have executed even one innocent person. They suspect they have. They probably have. Many fewer than the abolitionists claim, but they probably have. They don't know who it is, but it's horrifying that they have. If they have, and they probably have. To support this claim, Stephen Greenwald, a lawyer in New York and someone who has practiced in the death penalty for at least 20 years, stated that death penalty, its another attribute or defect, is highly seen in the likelihood of error being made. The wrong person they have been over the last 15 years or 20 years since the Innocent Project was first established. Something in the range of about 150 individuals who have been exonerated from death sentences because errors were made during the trial and or in the investigation that led to the trial. Imagine, this content is 2 years ago and United States continued with this law. And the question now is how much does this number increase after 2 years? Additionally, a recent research published this year by the Death Penalty Information Center has found 11 previous unrecorded death row exonerations, bringing the total number of people exonerated after being wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death to 185. Let me give you an example, a story about sentenced to death but innocent. Philip Morris of National Geographic published this story last February 8, 2021. It's very new, it's recent. A 63-year-old man named Kwame Ajamo was found guilty primarily because of the testimony of a 13-year-old boy about him murdering, who recanted his statement 39 years later and changed again his story. That boy changed his story after 39 years. Although Ajamo was released on a parole in 2003, Ohio would not declare him innocent on the murder for nearly another 12 years, and he was sentenced to death after being convicted of crimes he did not commit. This is just one of those horrifying stories about people wrongfully sentenced to death. Even one person who is failed to prove innocent, but is innocent and is convicted to death, is a fact that death penalty is not reliable enough to get lives and be implemented. In fact, it is a fault. It is flawed.
Proponents of anti-death penalty also claims that sentencing them to death costs more than just making them imprisoned. However, in latest cases, President Rodrigo Duterte disagreed with this statement. He then proposes the death penalty by hanging, which entails an obviously cheaper cost than maintaining inmates' daily needs. The government will indeed spend less. Furthermore, to terminate killers means to reduce the chances of the victim's family to be the next victim. To punish the offenders will surely take certainly of securing the lives of the victim's family. Protestants to death penalty stands that the law neglected the human rights. However, offenders are just forfeiting their rights as well by taking others' lives. And to solidify that, needless to say, a report in the US stated that there is 64% who are in favor of death penalty and said that it is morally justified. Opposing views claims that it kills innocents. My dear people, for the knowledge enrichment of you all, death penalty can only be distinguished when it is adequately processed by law. Again, death penalty takes quantities of years before the final execution can be actually carried out, as this shall first pass through into a fair investigation if an offender actually be qualified into executing. Just because it says death penalty means that offenders will surely get no escape. No, there is what we call capital trials before an appeal. According to the death penalty appeals process by Ave means Didier, in capital cases, the trial has two parts. First, the jury decides whether the defendant is guilty of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. Then, the jury must decide whether to impose a death sentence. For this part of the trial, the jury can consider all sorts of information, not only about the crime, but also about the defendant. For example, oftentimes the defense attorney will present information about the defendant's upbringing, family, mental condition, and home life. This penalty phase of the trial is unique among criminal cases. In non-capital cases, information about the defendant's background is typically presented to the judge in the probation department's pre-sentence report, prepared to aid the judge in deciding on a sentence. Even newly discovered evidence of innocence can highly be considered during the post-conviction proceedings. That means that offenders can be saved by many claims that will move the jury into doubting if offenders should really be sentenced to death. More than that, mitigating circumstances is to be considered as one of the steps. This contains facts that do not justify or excuse an act of, or offense, but may reduce the degree of moral culpability and thereby reduce the penalty. Examples include mental impairments, deprived background, and whatnot. Now, to be more specific and relevant to the main point in the context of death penalty, there is what we call safeguards guaranteeing protection of the rights of those facing the death penalty. Some of those safeguards are persons below 18 years of age at the time of the commission of the crime shall not be sentenced to death, nor shall the death sentence be carried out on pregnant women or on new mothers or on persons who have become insane.
What the affirmative side just assert that we, the anti-death penalty, claims that sentencing them to death costs more than just making them in prison. Indeed, it is. To support this claim of ours, according to Adamson in his recent article published last May this year, death penalty costs millions of dollars to the taxpayers, much of which could have been used to save hundreds more lives in healthcare services. Who are the taxpayers here? That is the question. The citizen of this country, us, we are the taxpayers. Instead of using that money for the sake of the overall well-being of the citizens, with the presence of death penalty, the astronomical benefit is altered to an immoral process. To argue with the affirmative's claim with the process of death penalty and their conclusion of it that it carefully filtered the evidences for an accurate judgment for death penalty does not strongly support the fact that it does kill an innocent life. And again, it is proven by the facts and evidences I have presented earlier. Let me go back to the three reasons I have presented. I have already exhibited and expounded the first two, and now will be the last one. Third is how justice is being presented and defined by death penalty. Abolitionists, we claim that death penalty is unjust and that all persons be treated equally. According to an article written by Andrea and Velasquez of Santa Clara University, the Jesuit University in Silicon Valley, stated, of 19,000 people who committed willful homicides in the US, In 1987, only 293 were sentenced to death. Who are these few being selected to die? Who are they? They are nearly always poor and disproportionately black. They added, it is not the nature of the crime that determines who goes to death row and who doesn't. People go to death row simply because they have no money to appeal the case, or they have poor defense, or they lack the funds of being witnesses to courts, or they are members of a political or racial minority. Death penalty is also unjust because it is sometimes inflicted on innocent people. As what I have stated earlier, according to facts and evidences and statistics, Immanuel Kant said, if he has committed a murder, he must die. In this case, there is no substitute that will satisfy the requirements of legal justice. Justice in a context also just means the catharsis, revenge. Our justice system should not be based on simply getting revenge on people who have done bad things. That is a really immoral idea. Revenge is entirely different from justice. That is why the government will do that for you, the familess victim. Otherwise, it will be called revenge, and that is not what justice is all about. Justice is being accountable to your actions. It is about us citizens not bearing the burden of feeding criminal who doesn't value human life.
So, in some reports that states that there are amount of wrongful execution. Well, that was due to the difference of methods being utilized in each state. Remember that each nation uses different procedures, but the effectiveness of death penalty implies if it were processed through in a fair and adequate steps. Again, it will be distinguished only when it passed into the adequate process of law. Otherwise, it is then can be explained as extrajudicial executions. So, there is no such reason to convict innocents, because there are considerations to be contemplated first before sentencing: age, mental health, background, and evidence of innocence. There are some factors that will make reduce the penalty, and thereby offenders will be no longer sentenced to death. All in all, blame the procedures, not the death penalty itself. Death penalty can be a deterrent if it's fully implemented. It serves as discouragement of potential killers or other offenders. It ensures the security of victims' family. It spares the lives of the people. It exterminates the possibilities to those inmates who are attempting to take lives if being freed. All in all, death penalty can put a fear out of those who are exploitative, abusive, killers, and offenders. In result, crime rate can be lowered. Therefore, Philippines or other countries should implement and tolerate death penalty.
I was I was all for the death penalty. Not until someone asked the question, do you trust your government never to make a mistake? Most US adults support the death penalty for people convicted of murder, according to an April 2021 Pew Research Center survey. However, according to the most recent article published last July 2021 by the same source, majorities believe that death penalty is not applied racially. Racially in a neutral way, does not deter people from committing serious crimes and does not have enough safeguards to prevent an innocent person from being executed. According to Emmeline Soken Huberty, a freelance author in an undated article, if the death penalty is not inhuman, discriminatory, and arbitrary, but it often claims innocent lives and doesn't even prevent crimes, then why should it still exist? It's disappearing from legal systems around the world. An article published last April 2021 by the Amnesty International stated that 483 executions in 18 countries in 2020, a decrease of 26% from 657 recorded in 2019. This figure represents the lowest number of executions that Amnesty International has recorded in the past decade. The same source presented that the country had abolished the death penalty for all crimes in May. Kazakhstan signed and in December 2022 took a steps aiming at the abolition of death penalty. In the USA, Colorado became the 22nd US abolitionist state. At the end of 2020, a statistic from Pew Research Center survey stated that a growing number of states have done away with the death penalty in recent years, either through legislation or a court ruling. Virginia, which has carried out more executions than any state except Texas since 1976, abolished capital punishment in 2021. Tolerating death penalty, taking the lives of people, believing that those who commit crimes like murder because they have taken the life of another have lost the possession of right to life, and that lessens crime. In contrast, that belief is injudicious. There is no credible evidence that the death penalty discourages crime more effectively than the usual method of detaining a person who committed a crime. Life imprisonment, for example. In fact, evidence and statistics reveals the exact opposing point. Humans should not take a life of other human, no matter the motives and causes, because killing is killing. Legitimizing this kind of penalty, death, is counterproductive in the moral message it expresses. Furthermore, when capital punishment is exercised for crimes that are not that severe or substantial, it is immoral, given that it is entirely incongruent to the detriment performed. Hood 2021. Capital punishment violates the condemned person's right to life and is fundamentally inhuman and degrading. From the statistics and data, proofs and evidences, information I have presented, Huberty added. So, it's time for all the nations to end it.